You were gracious enough to give me a brand new title of Dr. Phil James. I've just completed my doctorate at the University of Hertfordshire, and I have about, I don't know, 10 years experience as a CEO in professional and awarding bodies, and as you mentioned, most recently with the Institute of Leadership and Management. Before that, my career has been in construction, quarrying, building materials. That's when I had a proper job, when I was out actually doing things with hands and playing with big toys and all that sort of stuff. But I'm absolutely delighted to be sort of counted amongst this cohort of speakers this afternoon that are prepared just to challenge and provoke and dare to think and say something a little bit different about leadership and management, and sort of change the tired old ways in which we're thinking about organisations and ourselves as leaders, and things like purpose and vision and so on, and everything that you've been talking about. And I'd like to spend the next few minutes talking with everybody here about this first idea on the programme that's on our agenda: why leadership with a culture of care is interesting. And I wasn't sure why that phrase grabbed my attention in the first place. Why leadership with a culture of care is interesting. But as I started to think about that phrase a little bit more deeply, it struck me, it's not interesting. It's not interesting, is it? Because it's pretty obvious, isn't it? It's pretty obvious, right? Leadership with a culture of care. I think anybody enlightened enough to want to participate in this Friday afternoon webinar on leadership already gets that, right? So I'd be preaching to the converted if I wanted to spend the next 10 minutes sort of trying to persuade everybody to be caring leaders. So what's this about? Why is it a thing? Why does the phrase culture of care exist? Why are we even talking about this? I started thinking about this and I thought, well, it's a bit like how the word integrity suddenly appeared everywhere in all the corporate values statements of the major banks just after the financial crisis, which shone a spotlight on some rather dodgy financial practices. And it's a bit like things like corporate social responsibility becoming a mainstream phrase, a mainstream thing, after the realization that most corporations have been pretty socially and environmentally irresponsible. So culture of care is a thing, I think, because it's a response to a realization that we have a lack of care. And it appeals to us. We're here this afternoon because we want to identify ourselves as caring leaders. Of course we do. It's an enticing phrase though, isn't it? Because we feel a tiny pang of guilt, don't we, when we hear that phrase? A wee bit of guilt just nagging away at us as we realise that for a culture of care to be a thing, and for us to sort of flock towards it as a phrase, like moths to a flame, that means that the opposite must be true, mustn't it, in our experience, that the way we're working isn't working. Okay, so it starts to get a bit more interesting, for me, because if we do have a problem with the culture of care, and at the same time, if none of us need convincing because we're all enlightened enough to be doing it, well, that means we've got an even bigger problem, doesn't it? In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to call it, okay? Could it be that a culture of care is a bad thing? Okay, so now it's really starting to get interesting. Let's stay with that. Let's stay with that a moment. So what am I suggesting, that a culture of care is a bad thing? Well, I think first of all, mainstream management thinking and practice is all about technique, isn't it? A 5-step approach to transforming your culture, or 10 things all great leaders do before they have breakfast and make you feel that you should be doing it, and all of that sort of stuff. It's all about technique. So care, like a lot of other concepts like engagement or motivation or culture, becomes managerialized. It becomes an instrument. It becomes a set of measures, a set of techniques that you as a leader do to other people. And it's reinforced in even the most attractive and benevolent sounding views on management. You know, how to show your people that you care for them, how to listen effectively to people, how to empower people and get out of their way, and all that sort of stuff. And so the spotlight always seems to be on the leader, doesn't it? And other people are kind of just fade away into the shadows. It's all about your capabilities, your personality, your leadership style, your tools and techniques, the things that you're doing to them. whoever them are. So it's thinking that's based on the idea that the leader is separate to other people, superior even to other people. And the idea is to remind you to be caring and considerate to those people over there when you're being all charismatic and strategic, I suppose. And the other thing to notice about this is that care is all sort of warm and fluffy. It's being nice, it's taking the time to say well done to people, it's soothing people when they're down, it's healing the team when there's a conflict, it's restoring a sense of harmony, having an open door policy, walking the talk, demonstrating that you care about people. And so all this together leads to exactly the sorts of behaviours that we see around us and we take for granted, the sorts of organisational best practices that spring up in response to this idea of care. So we get mental health programs, we get employee engagement schemes, resilience training, recognition schemes, employee assistance programs, and things we could roll out, safety nets to catch people when they're struggling, policies and programs with their own brands, we always call them something, and dashboards of metrics to show definitively what a caring organisation we are. But to me, most of that stuff is at arm's length. It actually says we couldn't care less. It's stuff that springs out of risk registers and HR policies. It's the stuff on the board agenda that's normally towards the end, sandwiched somewhere between succession planning and a review of the annual staff survey. And to me, these sorts of approaches and techniques say that we do care. Yep, we do care. We care about how we look. We care about being seen as caring leaders. We care about deploying best practice to show that we're on top of things. And, who could deny that we're a competent and caring organisation? Have we got a culture of care? You betcha. You betcha. So look, why am I giving us all a hard time about this? What am I getting at? What's the point of this rant this afternoon? Well, because care has become managerialized, like everything else, to such an extent that we believe we're doing it, well, it's not really care that's the problem here, is it? It's the well-intentioned but blind managerialism that's the problem. This way of thinking about a culture of care, when it's wielded badly, but with the best of intentions, is just as dehumanizing as the old-fashioned, autocratic and uncaring leadership styles that we think we've left behind in the background. So done badly, implementing a culture of care reinforces the idea that other people are over there somewhere, human resources, units of production, human doings, not human beings, right? So we find ourselves caught in a vicious cycle. We want to care, we do care, but we become caught up in the habits and assumptions about what good management is. So the way that we go about it just ends up deepening the problem by dehumanizing organizations and denying people recognition as fellow human beings. So we respond to employee stress by putting people on resilience training, not really considering that we might just be reinforcing the fact that it's their fault if they can't hack it, so they need some training. It's your fault. We feed back the results of the annual engagement survey to the team to show that we're listening and their voices have been heard, but we squash those voices up with everybody else's and put them in a pie chart, don't we? And we say, oh, look, we've just advanced 1% on encouraging feedback or something. It's, let's celebrate that. So we promote harmony and consensus. And Nigel, you spoke about clear vision and clear goals. Yeah, one team singing from the same hymn sheet. Whilst at the same time, though, aren't we denying individuality, conflict, challenge? Aren't we trying to smooth out the very differences and disagreements and emotional responses that are not only sometimes the best source of innovation, but are a deeply human sign that people really care about what it is we're trying to do? So, okay, point made. So what do I think we should do about all of this, I guess, is the question. Well, first of all, I think then we need to fundamentally rethink, to change the conversation about leadership, if we're going to escape this sort of trap where even the most benevolent and caring management paradigms only seem to deepen the problem, despite our best intentions. We need to escape these ingrained habits and assumptions of what we think management and leadership is in order to get a better handle on what it means to care. So what if a culture of care had nothing at all to do with being warm and fluffy and nice, with healing people and soothing people, with listening to people? What if a culture of care had nothing to do with being a good servant leader, you know, delegating and empowering and hiring good people and getting out of their way and all of that sort of stuff? To me, a culture of care gets really interesting because it's no more and no less than taking people seriously. Taking people seriously. It's as simple and as complicated as that. So what do I mean? Well, I mean, it's recognizing people as people who care, people who, like us, have a stake in what they're doing, people who do what they do because it matters to them, to their sense of identity and fulfillment, and to their sense of meaning that people get in their work. In fact, it means shifting our whole worldview, I think, from an us and them view of leadership, from us as leaders and them over there being the people led, towards seeing leadership as an ensemble performance rather than a solo act, right? As something that arises between us, not as something that's done by a leader who's sort of separate and superior to everybody else. And as a leader, I think, therefore, it means getting out of your own way. So to, you know, stop trying to live up to all the grandiose claims about what it means to be a great leader, and a caring one at that. And instead, I think we need to think about our own self-image, our reputation, our identity as leaders, as something that's out of our hands. It's not within our control. It's fundamentally tangled up with and dependent upon the identity and the recognition of other people, that we can only begin to glimpse ourselves, to conceive of who we are, by noticing that we're both the same and different to other people at the same time. So difference matters, and ideas like conflict management and positive affirmation and harmonious team working can become a real problem if that means that it becomes impossible for other people to disagree or to challenge or to find their own voice under the weight of corporate values and engagement schemes and performance metrics and so on. So to me, a culture of care is not at all warm and fluffy. It's hard. It's risky. It's messy. It's deeply threatening to the cherished views that we hold of ourselves as leaders, actually. A culture of care is about caring enough about yourself to take other people seriously. It's about caring to understand that you're counting on people just as they're counting on you, so that you're accountable to each other. And that accountability, therefore, isn't something that just flows upwards in an organization through a traditional hierarchy, as you were mentioning, Nigel, through appraisal schemes and performance reviews and so on. Caring is about having the courage to be vulnerable as a leader, to stay with conflicts, to stay with difficult emotions and difference, rather than just sort of sorting everything out, covering over, cracking on, getting back to normal. It's about taking seriously other people's feelings as a reminder that they too have a stake in what you're all trying to do, that they really care as much as you do, and that noticing what happens when you care enough to recognize that other people care as well. I think it's about ultimately taking that picture that you've got in your head about what it is to be a leader and what organizations are, and starting to sort of repopulate it with human beings and not human doings. So I do think a culture of care is interesting after all, because we haven't got it right. It's interesting precisely because it's much more difficult than the best practice management approaches and techniques would have us believe. It's interesting because rethinking what we mean by care might just present us with some rather wonderful and surprising insights into what leadership is all about. Or, I guess, you know, you could always stay away from all of this, couldn't you? You could stay out of the messiness, the unpredictability, the diversity. You could just rise above all the politics and the conflict and the trying to make sense of things together, rise above it and, you know, protect your own image as a benevolent and caring and charismatic leader, roll out an employee engagement program, book some mental health training, go to another conference on leadership. I suppose, Nigel, it really just depends on how much you care.
Exactly so. Yes, thank you for that. Lots of very interesting angles in there that I applaud. Um, I'm reminded of a quote I've often used by Thomas Beecham, the old conductor, who always said, "The British don't like music, but they love the noise it makes." And I see that in what you're saying here. You know, in so many organisations, they like to look as if they're doing stuff, but they don't really necessarily believe it or want to do it or carry it through. So you get all the boxes ticked, you get all the programs in place, but the purpose of having it in the first place is somehow gone or dissipated.
Right, and it's because we do care, right? I don't think it's because we're necessarily being, malevolent about this and Machiavellian. I think it's because actually, as managers, as leaders, we do care. We're taking it seriously. We're trying to work out what we can do about issues, about employee burnout and apparent lack of engagement and so on. But the way that we come to think about these things is that we have to manage them. So we have to have a program of activity. We have to have a strategy around it all that we can sort of roll out to sort of encompass everybody. And then we wonder why eyes are rolling when we're standing up at the front of the conference room to say, folks, I'd just like to give you the results of the last employee survey. We've listened and we've now got this program to help address this thing that you told us about. And people have heard it all before, haven't they? And as a leader, actually, you feel it in those moments. You're thinking, shit, I'm getting some flack here. No one's saying anything, but I can see it in their eyes. And it's inadequate, actually. And I think that's why we turn up to conferences like this, because we're sort of thinking, I'm sort of doing everything right, but not really getting at the stuff I'm trying to sort out,
Exactly so. I was asked the question not very long ago by a board is saying, how do we show people that we care? And my answer to that always is, well, try actually caring.
It's a start.
Trying to work out how to fake caring or to portray caring. Why not actually promote people who actually do care? Because we have spent 30 years promoting quite a lot of people who fundamentally care about things and data and KPIs and all that kind of thing, don't necessarily care that much about their people. And I know you do, I do, all the people that are speaking here, and I would imagine all of the people on attending too do. But we are sort of singing to the choir here, aren't we? As you say.
I think we are, yeah. I think we are to an extent. But I think it's worth keeping singing, because I think that's where I was trying to get at, really, which is to say no, I don't think anybody turns up to this as an uncaring leader thinking I really should start to care. I don't think it's why people like that don't bother turning up in the first place. So what is the real problem? And I'm suggesting that it's that I'm actually being quite provocative by presenting a totally alternative view. Real life doesn't work like that. We have to have metrics, don't we? We have to tolerate programs, we have to have vision statements and so on, and values. Of course we do, but I think if that's all we're doing, and if we're thinking uncritically about those things and just expecting everybody to be okay, because everyone's got. I've given everybody a mouse map with the corporate values on, for goodness sake. How could they not know? If that's all we're doing, and we're forgetting about the fact that we're a bunch of human beings trying to get along with other human beings to get things done, then we're not going to achieve anything called a culture of care, however charismatic and transformational we think we're being, and however strategic.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of questions have come in that I think are interesting here. One of them says, can you comment then on where diversity comes into all of this? Is this caring a way of taking diversity seriously? Because we clearly haven't always in organisations.
Well, I love that question, because in the edit on the cutting room floor, I've got stuff in there about, well, what's a culture, and what about diversity and engagement, and what about some of these words? And of course, not enough time, not enough focus in the presentation to be able to deal with that. But I love the question, because yes, I think it is. I think diversity, again, we've suddenly realised that inclusion and diversity are a thing. We're not as inclusive and as diverse as we should be. So what have we done? We've got EDI policies, and we set up committees and diversity champions and metrics to measure these things. And okay, some of these things are important. They're stimuli, aren't they, to get something done? But if it stops there, we're worsening the situation. We're marginalising people further by doing the same old westernised, white, masculine management techniques to sort out the problem in the first place. So. What is diversity? We tend to think about visible diversity, don't we? We tend to think about gender and race, etc., on boards and so on. But actually, diversity goes much deeper than that. It's about diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, And ultimately for me, it's about recognizing people, and back to that idea of taking people seriously. If we did that at a very basic human level, we might find we don't have a problem, or as much of a problem as diversity as we do now.
It's interesting. I've always been fascinated by the fact that most boards I've worked with, they'll have a finance director. It's absolutely a given. They'll all have a finance director, and they may even have a marketing director. They're not always. Sometimes they'll have an HR people person on the board, but quite often not. But who looks after things like diversity, innovation, all this kind of thing? So you tend to find everything that isn't named by somebody else ends up in HR.
Yeah.
That's not the right place for it. Clearly, that just enables people to abdicate responsibility for it. I mean, Jules and I were having a conversation like this the other day. That often giving these things a job title means that other people can just go, "Phew, not my problem anymore."
Exactly. Yeah.
The fact is, all of these things are our problem, and you're right. We need to fix this from the middle, not from the top.